Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city. And we start. Jason Harper has always loved the weekend. For him, these were days when he could calmly do small chores around the house, fix something in the garage, or, as his wife often insisted, tidy up the lawn. Their small two-story house stood in a quiet suburb somewhere in the Midwest. The white fence around the site was already quite peeling, and within a week after the rains, the grass had grown so much that it began to spoil the whole appearance. "Jay, have you forgotten what we have planned today?" The voice of Catherine, or Kate, as everyone called her at work, came from the threshold. "Yes, yes, Mo," he responded, squinting slightly from the bright sun. "I'm serious." Kate walked out onto his porch, raising her hand to block the sunlight. "Our neighbors have hinted to us more than once that it's time to put the area in order, and it hurts my eyes when I go to work in the morning and see these thickets." Jason smiled tiredly. He knew that excuses wouldn't help now. The lawn was really overgrown, and Kate had recently developed a strange desire for everything perfect. It was as if even the mess on the kitchen table annoyed her, although she had previously been calm about it. But Jason didn't want to argue. He loved his wife, and since it's important for her now to keep everything under control, so be it. "Okay, now I'll take the lawnmower and do everything." Jason glanced at his watch. "You have to leave in half an hour, right?" "Yes, I have a meeting in the office. Try to finish before evening." And she suddenly paused, as if she wanted to say something else, but she remained silent and only nodded. Kate went into the house and Jason walked down the steps onto the lawn. It really was in a deplorable state. In some places the grass reached almost to the ankles. He turned on the lawn mower and began to slowly drive it around the yard. The even stripes of freshly cut greenery behind him were pleasing to the eye, and the smell of cut grass always reminded him of his childhood. When almost half the work was done, Jason noticed something bright between the stems. At first, he decided that he was just imagining things, maybe the wind had accidentally blown the garbage. Pausing, he bent down and parted the grass with his hands. What he saw made him sit up abruptly and glance at the house, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. In his fingers were women's lace panties of an unusual, even sophisticated look, clearly not cheap. At the same time, they are not at all similar to the simple, comfortable sets that Catherine wore. Jason froze, as if he was afraid that someone would come around the corner and accuse him of something inappropriate. Dozens of thoughts flashed through my head. What the hell? Where did they come from? Maybe the neighbor kids threw it as a joke, or did one of the guests leave it? But no one had visited them for a long time, except for Tommy Grant, their neighbor. What stupidity, he thought. Maybe the wind really blew it. I won't make a tragedy out of this. However, internal anxiety has already settled somewhere deep in the chest. A feeling that usually arises when you suspect that something is wrong in your own home, but are afraid to admit it to yourself. He quickly put the find in his pocket and looked around. Silence reigned behind the dense high fence that separated their house from the neighbor's yard. Jason didn't notice Tommy or his car. The guy would sometimes drop by to drink beer and chat about work and life. But to be fair, Tommy visited them more often than anyone else, and often stayed on the patio until late at night, especially when Kate was home. Jason took a deep breath and tried to regain his focus. "We need to finish the lawn," he thought. However, those damn lace panties couldn't get out of my head. He went through the options over and over again. Well, it couldn't be Kate. She doesn't like these models, and she wouldn't lose them in the yard. By the time Jason finished mowing, the sun was setting. Catherine had already left for work and didn't even say a special goodbye. She left only a short reminder on a piece of paper stuck to the refrigerator. "Don't forget to throw away the trash." Short and without emoticons, which was also unusual. Before, she always left small hearts or funny faces. Jason took off his heavy work gloves, walked to the trash cans, and threw out the grass clippings. Then he pulled the ill-fated panties out of his pocket and looked at them in the light of the lamp that was burning above the porch. The lace seemed expensive, the color of dark cherry. He didn't remember his wife wearing anything like that. "Hey, buddy," a voice was heard from behind. Jason nearly jumped. Turning around, he saw Tommy Grant standing with a can of beer in his hand. In the light of the lantern, the neighbor's face looked a little tired, but with a signature smile, which, according to rumors, drove many lonely neighbors crazy. "Oh, Tommy, you scared me," Jason muttered and hastily clenched the find in his fist, hiding it behind his back. "Hello? You're a little late." "Yes, I was walking past. I saw your light was on. I decided to look in. Would you like a beer? I have a couple more cans here." He lifted the bag, showing off a fresh purchase from a nearby store. Um, actually, not a bad idea. Only I first." Jason was feverishly wondering where to hide the lace so that the neighbor wouldn't suspect anything. Finally, he put it in his shorts pocket. "Okay, let's go to the patio." The patio was located behind the house, under an awning next to a small grill. The table and several chairs, which Jason himself had once made from oak planks, stood in the open air all summer, but due to good impregnation, the wood did not rot and looked quite decent. Tommy put the beer on the table and handed one can to the owner. "Well, what about another working day?" "For a day's work," Jason echoed and took his first sip. They were silent for a while, looking at the stars that began to break through the dark blue sky. The quiet clink of dishes and someone's laughter could be heard from the neighboring house. Probably the neighbors were receiving guests. "Listen, how is Kate?" "I see her less and less lately," Tommy asked, looking down at the jar. "Is she okay?" "Yes, I think so. She's just stuck at work. In recent months, there has been some kind of major project. She is constantly sitting in the office. Previously, she was in a hurry to get home, but now, sometimes, she arrives at 10 in the evening." Jason sighed and, as if making excuses, added, "You know how it happens when a project has to be completed, people live there for days." A strange expression flashed across Tommy's face, but he quickly changed the subject. "Understand. Well, if anything happens, I'm always ready to help, you know. It's not easy for you yourself to keep the workshop and the house in order and all this." "It's okay," Jason answered automatically, although inside he felt that nothing was normal. He suddenly felt uneasy. He found himself growing suspicions like weeds. Why is Tommy interested in Kate? Why is he asking this? Maybe it's not for nothing that I found those panties on my lawn. He felt ashamed for such thoughts. Tommy was always friendly, helped with housework, and in general never gave a reason for jealousy. Except, he actually came more often than he should have, especially when Kate was at home. "Okay, I have a shift in the morning. I'll go to bed," Jason said, draining the jar. "Thanks for the beer." "No problem, buddy." "See you," Tommy lightly patted him on the shoulder. When the neighbor disappeared into the darkness, Jason rose from his chair and took the mysterious panties out of his pocket. Looking around again, he opened the door to the house. There was silence inside. Kate had not yet returned. Turning off the light in the corridor, he walked to the second floor and entered the bedroom. It was neatly tidied up, more neatly than usual. The bed was made as smoothly as if it were in a hotel, and on the nightstand there was a photo from the wedding. Him, Kate, and a smiling Tommy among the guests in the background. No, Jason thought, looking at the photo. It's impossible for there to be anything between them. We've been friends for several years. But the wind of suspicion had already clung to his thoughts like a burr. He went down to the basement where he had a small workshop. On the shelves were tools, cans of paint, and spare parts. In one of the corners there were old cardboard boxes with old things. Jason opened one of them and put the lace panties inside, wrapping them in some rag so they wouldn't be obvious. "Let them lie here for now," he decided, "and then I'll figure out what to do with them." As he walked out of the basement, Jason felt his heart beating faster. He didn't even notice how overexerted he was. "But I remembered that I didn't call Kate even once that day to ask how she was. It's probably late, she might be driving," he muttered and went to the kitchen. There was a note from his wife on the table. "I'll be late, don't wait. Have dinner yourself. 2. He carefully folded the piece of paper in half and put it in his pocket, which until recently had contained someone else's piece of women's underwear. This night promised to be restless thoughts of what was happening in his own home now haunted him. Outside the kitchen window, a neatly trimmed lawn could be seen in the faint moonlight, and next to him are tiny footprints leading deeper into the yard to where the grass has not yet recovered from the evening cutting. It might not have meant anything, but Jason felt an unpleasant chill down his spine. It was as if someone was walking around his yard and could appear out of the darkness at any moment. He turned off the light, went upstairs, and lay down on the bed, trying to calm his thoughts. But neither the ghostly glow of the moon nor the soft coolness of the sheets could calm his inner tension. He listened to the sounds of the night, listened for the front door to open, for the keys to ring. What am I doing wrong? He asked himself. Or is this not about me at all? It was midnight and Kate was still not home. Jason turned to the wall and closed his eyes, hoping that at least sleep would give him some respite. But behind his closed eyelids, he saw only those ill-fated lace panties and incomprehensible footprints in the depths of the garden. It was as if the night itself was whispering to him that the quiet life in this house would never be the same. Only a few days have passed since the evening when Jason discovered someone else's lace panties in the yard, but life in the Harper household seemed to have shifted from its usual axis. At least that's how Jason himself felt. Catherine now almost never showed up at home immediately after work. She either stayed late at the office or went to see a friend. She answered her husband's questions in monosyllables and was clearly in no hurry to make excuses. She seemed to be saving her strength for something more important than talking to him. In the mornings, Jason got up early. He had as much work in his workshop as his wife. Sometimes he saw Kate leaving the house, throwing on a light raincoat, quickly saying bye and slamming the door. There was tension in her voice, which she carefully hid behind an even intonation. In the evenings, everything became different too. Previously, when Kate returned home, she would quickly talk about her day, pouring tea or heating up dinner, and then they would watch TV or go to the cinema together. Now her late arrivals were becoming the norm. Often she would simply disappear into the bedroom, close the door, and briefly say that she was tired. The dishes had remained in the sink since yesterday, and in the refrigerator, instead of the usual notes with hearts, there were dry shopping lists. Coffee, cream, greens, cat food, that's all. Jason tried to fight similar thoughts to himself. She's stressed at work, it's normal, it will pass. After all, it happens that people get tired. It's not necessarily connected. But every time he remembered the lace underwear he had hidden in the basement, an incomprehensible burning sensation grew in his chest. He felt that something was wrong. One evening, or rather, closer tonight, Jason, sitting in the kitchen with a book in his hands, heard a familiar voice outside the window. It was Tommy Grant, their neighbor and also Jason's friend. However, lately Jason couldn't shake the feeling that he had begun to show too much attention to Kate. As often happens, such thoughts come gradually. You notice that a person looks at your wife for too long, or laughs at her jokes too loudly, or keeps asking when she will return from work. Maybe this is my fantasy, Jason thought. But no, there is something strange. Tom's voice was approaching their house, and soon there was a soft knock on the door. Hey, buddy, are you still awake? Tommy looked cheerful, as always. In his hand, he had a can of beer, apparently already started. Drops of condensation were red on the walls of the dripping metal. Apparently not. Come in. Jason opened the door, trying not to show his irritation. Tommy walked into the kitchen, sat down on a stool, and put the jar on the table. To be honest, I'm going home. It's dark, boring. I think I'll come to you and let's chat. I heard you coming from the backyard. Yeah, I decided to take a shortcut through the neighbor's yard. They themselves said that they don't mind if I go straight. It's shorter this way. Jason nodded and caught himself thinking that just through Tommy walked into the backyard, into the area where he had once found someone else's panties. An alarming suspicion stirred in his head, but Jason did not want to be tormented by suspicions again. They were already sharpening him from the inside. "How are you doing, Jay?" Tommy asked, looking into the owner's face. "You look tired." "Work, and there are a lot of little things at home. I want to play tricks on something here. Steal a fence, fix a garage door. So I can help. You know, I'm always in favor. Just tell me." They chatted for another 10 minutes. Jason noted that Tommy never directly asked about Kate. Usually he would always ask something like, "How is Kate?" At home. But today, not a word. Instead, he talked about some ridiculous situation at his work. Then the neighbor, having finished his beer, announced that he would move on since he had to get up early tomorrow. But already on the threshold, he suddenly turned around. "By the way, how is Catherine? Is she feeling okay?" "Yes. I don't know. She is now stressed at work and is often delayed." Jason said this in a kind of faded tone. "Yeah." Tommy looked somewhere to the side, pursed his lips, about to say something, but changed his mind. "Okay, see you, friend." When the door closed, Jason stood for a long time without moving. It seems that the neighbor wanted to say something important, but did not dare. Maybe he really sees that something is wrong, Jason thought. The questions only made things worse. In the morning, he woke up from the sound of water in the bathroom. Kate must have been returning from a run. She sometimes ran in the morning if she had the energy. But recently, this regime has gone awry. Jason rubbed his eyes, got out of bed, and opened his closet. With a habitual movement, he took out his shirt, trying to drive away the remnants of the night's worries. He was about to go downstairs when he heard a knock on the bathroom door. "Jay, please bring me a towel. Now," he responded. On the way to the bathroom, he noticed that Kate's clothes, which she had worn in the evening, were lying in the hallway along with carelessly discarded shoes. This is not like her at all. Kate usually loved order and rarely scattered things anywhere. Approaching the door, he saw a cloud of warm steam escaping through the slightly open crack. "Here, take it," he said, sticking out his hand with a towel. For a moment, the door opened a little wider, and he saw Kate behind the cloudy glass of the shower stall. Everything would be fine, but at that same moment Jason noticed a dark spot on her thigh. At first he decided that it was his imagination, because the water splashes distorted the picture. But when Kate turned and picked up the towel, he saw a distinct bruise, as if from a strong blow or an unfortunate fall. "Kate, are you okay?" he asked as she cursed softly, rubbing her bruise on the edge of the booth. "Yes, yes. Just yesterday." She paused. "In the office, I twisted my ankle and hit the table." "Are you sure? Everything is somehow strange. Maybe during training. You said that sometimes you go to the gym after work." "No, I was with Sarah, my friend. We had dinner together and already in the office after. In general, it doesn't matter. It was awkward. It's her own fault." Her answer sounded extremely confused, as if she had not prepared a convincing version of what happened in advance. Kate had never really been a good liar. When she did lie, she began to speak faster and get confused in the details. However, she usually didn't have to lie, and Jason didn't remember her hiding little things like that from him. "Cold," he muttered, realizing that the conversation was going downhill. "Be careful. If necessary, I can go to the pharmacy in the evening and buy ointment." "No need," she answered dryly. "Everything is fine. I'm already better." Closing the bathroom door, she quickly became defensive, not literally, but emotionally. Jason stood there for a few seconds, listening to the sound of the water. Then he sighed and went into the kitchen. From below, I heard my wife leave the bathroom, almost run up the stairs to the bedroom, and 5 minutes later, she just as quickly came down, dressed in a formal trousers suit. "I'm late," she stated, throwing the keys into her bag. "I'll have breakfast in the office." "Wait, Jason began, but she had already slammed the door without even saying goodbye. The evening turned out to be long and stuffy. Kate said over the phone that she would be visiting Sarah after work to discuss something important. Jason decided not to sit in an empty house, but took up the old fence, which he had been meaning to paint for a long time. In the evening, when the sun became softer and reddish reflections fell on the roof of the neighbor's house, he heard the back gate opening. The steps were leisurely. "Hello, neighbor," Tommy's voice rang out. "Those who work really never dream of rest, right?" "Hey, Tom," Jason said, looking up from the paint can. He felt himself grinding his teeth without noticing it. "So I decided to update the fence. Can't I interfere?" Tommy asked, raising his eyebrows. "Not really." Jason shrugged. He couldn't say help. He didn't want Tommy to stay too long. The neighbor was already here more often than necessary. They exchanged a few words about the weather and the new sign on their street. Tommy seemed to be in a good mood, but Jason noticed that his neighbor's gaze from time to time went somewhere to the side, as if he was hesitant to ask about something. "Listen, is Kate home?" Tommy suddenly asked, exactly confirming Jason's worst fears. "No, at a friend's place. Should be back later," Jason answered as evenly as he could. "What is it?" "No, nothing, I just asked. The other day, she and I, well, in general, we met in passing and had a few words for life. I thought maybe we could continue the conversation." What other conversation? Jason wanted to ask, but for some reason he didn't dare. He felt that if he started asking questions right now, something might be revealed that he was not ready for. "Yeah, got it," he finally squeezed out. "Okay, I guess I'll paint a couple more boards and get ready." Tommy muttered something vague, wished him good luck with the fence, and left through the same gate. Jason watched him leave, wondering why he looked so thoughtful. But the answer, of course, could not come on its own. When it finally got dark, Jason set the paint can on the workbench in the garage, washed his hands, and went up to the porch. The eye caught on a tiny letter peeking out of the mailbox. A neat envelope with Kate's name written on it. No stamp, no return address. Apparently someone just tossed it here today. Inside was a small piece of paper with a short note. "You promised. I'm waiting for you. I hope you remember our agreement." And that's it. No signature. Jason's hands clenched involuntarily. My heart began to pound, as if from running fast. Who could have written this? Which other one promised? What kind of deal? Maybe this is a mistake? Or, his thoughts immediately returned to that strange underwear, to the bruise on his thigh. Catherine was clearly hiding something, and now this short note almost seemed like proof that she had secrets. He heard the gate in the yard creak. Quickly stuffing the note back into the envelope and tucking it into his jeans pocket, Jason turned around. I immediately noticed the headlights of my wife's car lighting up the driveway. Kate slowly stopped, turned off the engine, and hesitantly climbed out. Fatigue was visible on her face, and she didn't even notice that her husband was waiting for her on the porch. "Hello," she said as she looked up. "Hello. How's Sarah?" Jason asked mechanically. "Fine. We talked. She was tired too." Kate shrugged and walked past him into the house. "Today was a nightmare. I'm just squeezed like a lemon." Jason came in next and took off his shoes. He wanted to start a conversation about the letter, but could not find the right words. Kate, meanwhile, as if reading his thoughts, said, "I'll take a shower and go to bed. I have a difficult meeting tomorrow." "Wait," he said, putting his hand on her shoulder, but she quickly shook him off. "Let me rest, please. If you want to talk, let's do it tomorrow." Her voice sounded harsh, almost cold. Jason pursed his lips and nodded. He was left alone in the corridor, hearing Kate coming up the stairs. More and more often, he caught himself not knowing what to say to his wife in order to regain the previous intimacy. Gone are the jokes, mutual teasing, light touches, conversations about nothing, everything that once made their marriage so warm. Instead, they were drowning in some kind of viscous swamp of omissions and isolation. Half an hour later, when the bedroom was quiet and Kate had probably fallen asleep, Jason went upstairs. He carefully entered the room. The weak light of the night lamp illuminated only her profile. She lay on her side, facing the wall, and breathed evenly. I quickly fell asleep, it turns out. He put his cell phone on the nightstand and went to the bathroom. There he took off his shirt and looked at himself in the mirror. "What's wrong with me?" he suddenly thought. The fear that his wife might be cheating on him was mixed with shame. Maybe he was just suspicious and jealous. What if this is really true? But the bruise, the strange note, her leaving in the evenings. There were too many details that did not add up to the usual picture. Jason came out of the bathroom, sat down on the edge of the bed, and looked at his sleeping wife. I wanted to wake her up right now and demand an explanation. But is it really possible to hold trials like this at night? He quietly took a breath, hoping that reason would prevail. If there is something between her and Tommy, he thought, then how could this happen? When? Is he really that blind? He remembered the times he'd caught glimpses of Tommy touching Kate's hand, a little longer than normal acquaintances should, the way they looked at each other when they thought Jason wasn't looking. Isn't this all just paranoia? Sleep did not come, and in the end, he quietly got up and went down to the living room. There, over a cup of cold coffee, only questions were born in his head that he did not know how to ask, and even less understood what to do with the answers. Where to go if it suddenly turns out that Kate is lying to him? Divorce? Create a scandal? Pretend that everything is fine? He didn't know. The next morning, Kate disappeared as quickly as in the previous days. She quietly got up, put on a formal skirt, put on makeup in front of the mirror, somehow straightened the bed, and, almost without looking at her husband, left the house. It's unlikely she had breakfast. Jason woke up to the sound of the door closing and realized that he had slept through the moment when he could have calmly talked to her. However, I doubted that the conversation would have been calm. Before work, he decided to look into the basement. Will he find any clues there? The same panties that he had hidden lay in the same place, wrapped in a rag. Jason unfolded them, looked at the lace, trying to understand at least something. Manufacturer, size, color. Nothing in them indicated a specific owner, just that they were obviously not cheap. He figured it could be a boutique or an expensive online store. But what's the difference? The only thing he achieved was to raise a raging wave of anxiety within himself again. Throwing the laundry back into the rag, he went upstairs, threw a couple of spoons of instant coffee into the cup and poured boiling water over it. He drank it, barely tasting it, and ran out into the garage to go to work. Jason is not used to investigating anything in his own family, but recent events have pushed him to take unusual actions. He could no longer simply brush aside his disturbing thoughts and hope that everything would work itself out. The lace panties found among the tall grass, the bruise on Kate's thigh, her prolonged delays at work, and then the anonymous note, all this combined now deprived him of a restful sleep. He felt like a man who was lost in a dark forest and forced to look for at least some light to show the way. However, during the day, in the whirlwind of work and distracting activities, he still managed to temporarily drive away gloomy thoughts from himself. The real anxiety came late in the evenings or at night, when silence filled the house and Kate was already asleep or pretending to be asleep in the next room. It was at such moments that Jason was suddenly overcome by a persistent desire to understand the mystery, not to leave questions unanswered. It was as if an instinct was screaming inside. Until you understand what is happening, you will not find peace of mind. So this time, around midnight, Jason lay with his eyes open, listening to his wife's calm breathing behind the thin wall. From the quiet rustling of the sheets, he realized that Kate had turned over to her other side and most likely continued to sleep. Usually they shared one bedroom, but for the second day Kate, citing her extreme fatigue and the need to sleep without irritants, moved into a small guest room. Jason at first wanted to be indignant, but feeling that the conflict threatened to only drive her further into himself, he retreated. Now, left alone, he could not find a place for himself. In the end, he got up, threw a warm hoodie over his shoulders, and walked barefoot into the corridor. The house was in darkness. Only a faint glimmer of a street lamp penetrated through the glass on the front door, creating flickering shadows on the walls. Descending to the first floor, Jason passed the kitchen, where the lamp above the table barely illuminated the sink with a couple of dirty dishes. Next is a short corridor towards the door to the basement. With a sinking heart, he felt a familiar excitement that stabbed somewhere inside. There, below, on one of the shelves, lay a thing that he had already grown to hate, and which at the same time excited his imagination, those same lace panties. Opening the door, he felt for the switch. A dim light illuminated the wooden steps. Creaking gloomily, they let him down, as if resisting, not wanting to let him into the depths of the basement. The humid air, typical of unburned basements, hit the nose with a slight mustiness, mixed with the smell of old paint and wood. Jason walked to his workbench, where his find lay carefully on the bottom shelf in a box under gray rags. He squatted down, picked up the rag, and unfolded it. The small piece of fabric, decorated with delicate lace, looked so innocent and yet so sinister, like a symbol of what had eluded him in Kate's life. He took the panties in his hands and looked at them more closely. The last time he thought about their possible identity, he limited himself to only visual inspection and guesswork. But now, remembering that Kate always wore the same perfume, which he had given him for Christmas, he decided to test the scent. Even if it looks ridiculous, the sense of smell often tells you what you cannot see with your eyes. Bringing the cloth closer to his face, he took a deep breath. At first, there was a faint smell of laundry or perhaps fabric softener. But on the second wind, a distinct aroma of familiar notes hit the nose. This is undoubtedly the same Eternity perfume that Jason had difficulty obtaining last year. Kate used them almost daily. He remembered well this fragrant mixture of delicate jasmine and musk with a slight citrus freshness. She once made him so happy, associated with the touches of his beloved wife in the morning. And now this aroma came from someone else's underwear. Jason pulled away for a moment, wrapping his fingers around the lace fabric and cursing under his breath. This means that if the panties really have Kate's scent on them, then they cannot belong to someone random. They were not thrown over the fence by hooligan teenagers or blown away by the wind. Hardly anyone else uses exactly the same as a rare perfume in their area. But she said she didn't like lace, he thought out loud in the dimly lit basement. She said that convenience is more important to her. He suddenly remembered how a year ago, at one of their rare romantic dinners lately, Kate said, "Underwear should be comfortable and simple. I like to feel free." Why then would she need something so defiantly feminine, obviously not cheap? However, she never wore it at home. Perhaps the purchase was made on purpose, not for him. This thought, like a treacherous prick, stabbed Jason painfully in the heart. He carefully sniffed the fabric again. Yes, it was impossible to make a mistake. This smell is the scent of his wife, the one to which he is accustomed. And yet, just the guess that Kate was acquiring something new was not enough for him. Maybe someone really was playing a joke by rubbing her perfume into her underwear. This idea already sounded overly fantastic, but why not? Life sometimes presents much more surreal numbers. What if this? Stop, he told himself. I need more real facts and not rush between crazy versions. Although the internal trembling continued to not go away, bending over the panties, he suddenly noticed a small tag sewn inside. When he examined the find for the first time, he did not pay attention to it or simply did not consciously look for it. And now, having seen it, he pulled on a tiny piece of white fabric. The size was indicated thereas, and some partially erased inscription in English. The handwriting of the corporate brand, apparently. Jason didn't have a thorough understanding of women's underwear, but he wasn't such a layman that he didn't understand that this size matches Kate's measurements exactly, and it certainly couldn't belong to someone much taller or denser. Everything inside tightened. It looked like the panties were indeed hers. No less horrifying was the question. If so, then why were they abandoned in the tall grass? Maybe Kate really lost them there in some unimaginable situation, and it's not about someone else's man, but about something else, about some of her personal secrets. Maybe there is a completely logical explanation for all this. Heavy breathing escaped from his chest. Jason carefully wrapped the cloth back into the rag. He had a burning desire to go up to his wife right now and demand an explanation, but he understood it would be pointless. She will either run into another, "I'm tired, let's do it tomorrow," or she will lie, and he will break the woods in a rage. He knew he needed to have a conversation with Kate, but a much more thoughtful one, to truly understand what was on her mind. Jason turned off the light and quietly walked up the creaking steps. I sat in the living room in the dark for a while, holding my head in my hands. His thoughts rushed from resentment to jealousy, from fear to a vague hope that everything was not as bad as he thought. After all, there were years of happy life in their marriage. There were holidays, laughter, mutual trust. How could everything turn around so quickly? Sleep came to him only in the morning, short, heavy, full of snatches of dreams. In some of them he saw Kate, who stood on the threshold of the house with a face distorted by pain, and screamed something, waving that same lace lingerie in her hands. He woke up in a cold sweat. The sun was already rising. The next day, Jason felt as empty as if he had spent the entire night in the shower under ice-cold water. He had breakfast alone, mechanically sipping coffee and almost not feeling its taste. It was still early in the morning, and Kate apparently had a busy work schedule. She got up while it was still dark to go somewhere, apparently to one of her crazy meetings. The conversation was postponed again. It seemed that there was less and less of anything in common between them, except for registration in the same house. It frightened, angered, and hurt. He thought back to the arguments he might have to make to his wife. "I feel like we're growing apart. I want to know what's going on." But each time he lacked the courage to speak. Jason wasn't doing well at work either. He looked at his watch more than he did tasks. At the end of the day, a colleague who noticed his absent-mindedness asked, "Hey, is everything okay?" To which Jason just waved his hand tiredly and, citing poor health, asked to leave early. Returning home, he found the usual emptiness. Kate did not appear. Towards evening, he caught himself with a sudden thought. What if Kate changed her perfume? Lately, he smells they don't do it as often as before. And suddenly, these panties retained the scent precisely because she perfumed herself for someone else when leaving the house. This idea seemed almost crazy to him, but still made his heart clench with painful jealousy. "You're just going crazy," he tried to calm himself, sitting down on the sofa and looking at the wall. But his imagination painted pictures one more terrible than the other. He saw Kate getting out of the car somewhere in a remote area, entering a rented apartment or hotel where someone met her. There she takes off her ordinary underwear, puts on lace, and then... He drove away these thoughts with horror, as if he wanted to protect himself from them. Somewhere around 8 in the evening, a familiar sound was heard in the house. The door opened. Jason stood up, about to step into the corridor, but from the kitchen, where he managed to reach, it was clear that it was not Kate. The figure of Tommy, a neighbor, appeared in the doorway. He looked into the house rather hesitantly, although he usually entered without unnecessary ceremony. "Hello, Jay," he said quietly, raising his hand in a hesitant gesture. "I knocked, but apparently you didn't hear. Can I?" "Come in," Jason said, trying not to show his irritation. He's not exactly not happy to see his neighbor, he just didn't have the strength to talk to anyone right now. "I wanted to ask if everything is okay with you. I see you returned earlier today, and you look." Jason looked down. How can I explain to Tommy what is going on inside him? However, there is no need to explain anything to him. "Everything is fine," he answered briefly and pointed to a chair at the kitchen table, saying, "Sit down." "Do you mind if I offer you a beer?" Tommy suggested, seeing that his friend had anxiety written on his face. "Yes, I'll bring something myself now." Jason stood up and looked into the refrigerator. There was only a single bottled ale there. He handed it to his neighbor and poured some water for himself. They drank in silence for a minute, and all the while Tommy's gaze slid over Jason's face, as if trying to unravel his secret. "Listen," Tommy finally said, "you know that if you need help, I'm always ready to lend a shoulder." "Yes, thank you," Jason nodded. When Tommy left, Jason sank heavily back into his chair and remained completely motionless for several minutes. Now Jason knew for sure the panties smelled like Kate. She perfumed them. He had no doubt that they belonged to her. But why were they lying in the yard? What reason did Kate have for dropping them there or throwing them away? And why is she hiding them from him if they're just new underwear? Did she really think that he would be happy to find a surprise? No, this is too ridiculous. Most likely, she wanted him to never didn't see this thing again. Tiredly, she leaned on him so that a lump formed in her throat. Jason knew that a conversation with Kate was inevitable. But did he want the truth itself? They say that sometimes it is better not to know. But deep down, he felt that ignorance was killing their relationship even more. If they continue to pretend that nothing is happening, they will finally lose what is fragile that still remains between them. Later, as night fell again outside and a soft twilight filled the rooms, Jason briefly imagined that Kate would explain everything herself. That she has her own reason, an absurd incident, a prank, a lost bet. Anything, as long as it's not treason. If only there was no crack that turns their marriage into fragments. But in the depths of his soul, he felt that the subtle smell of women's perfume was on someone else's, and now it was definitely not a stranger. Lace speaks louder than any words. And one day you will have to bring this secret to light, because otherwise it will grow like a weed, poisoning everything around. So, when, after midnight, he heard Kate carefully enter the house, trying not to make any noise, and go to the bathroom, Jason decided that this was the time to act. But having reached the door, he discovered that he could not move, as if all his muscles were frozen. He stood behind a thin wall and heard Kate turn on the water and hear her shoes fall to the floor. It seemed that there was only one movement of the hand between them, but in reality there was an abyss of resentment, jealousy, and understatement. He remained standing there as the sound of the water died down and the bathroom door opened. Kate walked down the hallway without noticing him and disappeared into the guest room. And he never managed to speak. And he just clenched his fists, cursing his indecision and cursing those ill-fated panties, which were now for him a symbol of the break that their relationship was slowly but surely becoming. But no matter what happened next, now at least he knew one thing: that's her smell. This means that conversation is inevitable, and Jason prepared for it as if it were a battle, the outcome of which would determine whether their marriage would survive or collapse like a house of cards. Jason had always liked Kelly as a cheerful, sincere, and harmlessly talkative person. She had been one of Kate's best friends since college, and they often went shopping together or had lunch at their favorite cafes. However, Jason hasn't heard much about Kelly from his wife lately. Kate either didn't mention her at all or talked about the next get-togethers that, oh well, it's inopportune to go to. So when he ran into Kelly in a shopping center parking lot, his heart skipped a beat. This seemed like a rare opportunity to find out at least something after all. According to Kate, she was meeting with a friend almost every other day. He noticed Kelly coming out of a nearby store that sold books and stationery. She held several packages in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. Noticing Jason, she smiled and walked over, raising her eyebrows questioningly. "Wow, I didn't expect to see you here, Jay. How are you?" Jason smiled back as casually as he could. "Everything is fine." "Well, I came in to buy something for the workshop." "How are you?" Kelly held up the package, displaying the flowery inscription. "I decided to go out for gifts on the weekend. My niece's birthday is coming soon." They exchanged pleasantries about the weather and how quickly time flies. But Jason could hardly contain his impatience, wanting to quickly get to the main point. He remembered that Kate had mentioned several times dinners with Kelly that allegedly happened just the other day. If anyone can confirm or deny her words, it is Kelly. "Listen," he finally began cautiously, trying to look as calm as possible. "Kate said you two meet often. As I understand it, you have some regular get-togethers there with wine and TV series." At the word often, Kelly raised her eyebrows in surprise. "What are you talking about?" "I think we haven't seen each other for ages. 2 weeks for sure, maybe more." Jason seemed to take his breath away in surprise. He was counting, of course, on some clarifications, discrepancies in days, but Kelly, it seems, at all I didn't understand what we were talking about. "Seriously?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "She said that you were going almost every other day." Kelly blinked, batting her eyelashes. "Is it true? Did she tell you this?" "Listen, I just invited her for pizza last month. I thought we'd hang out after work, but she said she was too busy and refused. Since then, she either did not call back or was simply unavailable. I already stopped tugging at her. I decided that she had no time for gatherings now." Everything inside Jason turned upside down. This meant that getting together with Kelly was pure fiction. He hoped that his friend would at least confirm a couple of meetings that Kate actually went to, but now the whole story was completely falling apart. He realized that he looked too tense and was probably starting to attract the attention of passers-by. Trying to pretend that nothing fatal had happened, he forced a smile. "Yeah, I see, I probably got something wrong. Kate always explains her plans in confusing language. I could have misunderstood." Kelly narrowed her eyes, as if realizing that something was wrong. "Is she okay?" she asked cautiously. "I was just worried when she stopped responding to messages. I thought maybe she was super busy." An alarming thought rang in Jason's head. She doesn't answer her friends either. But he said out loud, "I think yes, just a little tired from work." Kelly seemed to have calmed down, although her face indicated that she did not fully believe these explanations. Be that as it may, she did not go deeper. "Well, if she suddenly needs something or wants to talk it out, let her know that I'm nearby. Okay, Jay, I gotta go. Take care and say hi to Kate." With these words, she warmly hugged him goodbye, and Jason returned the hug automatically, feeling a whole hurricane of emotions bubbling in his chest. When Kelly left, he stood in the middle of the parking lot, trying to get his thoughts in order. So she was lying about her friend. She didn't even try to reconcile the versions. A chain was unwinding in my head. If Kate wasn't with Kelly, then where had she been all this time? And why talk about friends at all if their meetings do not actually happen? Jason felt his head begin to spin. It took him about 5 minutes to get into the car and come to his senses. Turning on the engine, he looked at his face reflected in the mirror, a gray, haggard man with sunken eyes and nervously compressed lips. "This is what I'm becoming," he thought. "It is impossible to continue living in such tension." But it seemed that he could not stop. The mystery had too many scattered fragments, each of which indicated that Kate, for some reason, was leading a double life. After taking a few deep breaths, Jason drove home. On the way, he noticed that he was in no hurry to get there. The fact of the lie seemed to him a painful blow. He was ready to admit that Kate was tired of the relationship, of the routine, of his eternal work in the workshop. But why then make up meetings with Kelly if she actually goes somewhere else? I remembered the scene when Jason asked, "How did you spend your evening?" She shrugged her shoulders and, without looking up, answered something like, "Everything is fine. We discussed the latest news. Kelly is again trying to learn how to cook exotic cuisine. It's like laughter." And she didn't even blink. How easy it was for her. On the way, he wanted to call Kate, but at the last moment, he changed his mind. He didn't know what to tell her. There was no point in asking questions. She would probably find a new excuse, and he didn't want to get involved in a quarrel over the phone. It's better to fight this fight face to face. When Jason entered the house, he was greeted by silence. No sounds, no steps from above. Kate hasn't returned yet. He went to the living room window, lifted the curtain. The view of the street was boring. Rare passers-by, a few cars. There was Kate's laptop on the table, but alas, it was password protected. Jason found himself wanting to try to hack it, but then he felt ashamed. He never rummaged through his wife's things, and he only knew how to use a computer basically to look at drawings for work. And what would that give? If Kate decided to hide the truth, it is unlikely that she kept all the secrets in the open. He took off his jacket and slowly walked into the kitchen, where he found a note from his wife. "Jay, I'm going to see Kelly in the evening. She's having difficulties with her family. I'll be back late." "Don't wait." Jason read it 3 times, looking at the carelessly written words over and over again. He was amazed at how cleverly and brazenly Kate continued to use the image of her friend as a cover. Kelly just said to herself that she hasn't seen Kate for 2 weeks, and Kate writes that she is going to help her with difficulties in the family. The rage inside flared up with renewed vigor. It seemed that just a little more, and he would lose his temper, call his wife, shout out everything that had accumulated, and throw these deceitful notes in her face. But just like in the parking lot, he suppressed this impulse, realizing that without evidence and a clearly formulated position, he could only stir up a scandal and not get any answers. Swallowing the lump in his throat, He sank into a chair. Thoughts swirled chaotically around betrayal, unclear motives, and endless why. He soon felt that he could not just sit at home waiting for the next lie. He needed a distraction, to keep his hands busy so as not to go crazy with guessing. Jason went into the yard to finish some minor repairs to the fence, even though it wasn't urgent. While he was fiddling with screwdrivers and boards, the sky above the houses acquired the warm colors of sunset. A light wind stirred the tops of the trees. The birds fell silent, turning to soothing trills. During this evening's symphony, he suddenly realized how much his pulse was racing. He hated this feeling, fear and anger that seethed inside him at the same time, threatening to either explode in a storm or drive him crazy. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, Jason stopped hearing the sound of his instruments and realized that he was already sitting, staring at one point. The thought was knocking inside. She's deceiving you again. She's out there somewhere, pretending Kelly's in trouble. The question was, what could he do? Should I call Kelly and see if Kate is here? No, this would be a direct challenge to a duel for the wife. Although, maybe it would be worth it? He stepped over the laid-out tools and headed into the house. He opened the drawer and looked for Kelly's number in his address book. But having dialed the first numbers, I stopped. What then? Say, "Hello, Kelly, so is Kate yours?" And if a friend answers, "No," then what? Is he going to set a trap for his own wife right now? Maybe this is already crossing all boundaries. A feeling of powerlessness, and at the same time an almost panicky determination to find out everything completely mixed up in him, squeezing out the last of his mental strength. He put the phone away. No, not now. He didn't want to put anyone in an awkward position. But he knew, if Kate continued to lie as openly, he would have no choice but to bring her into conversation directly. Thinking that his girlfriend had become a mere cover in this mysterious game of his wife, Jason changed his clothes and remained sitting in the kitchen, leafing through an old photo album. In the pictures, Kate beamed with a happy smile, looking straight into the lens. When was this? 5 years ago. It seemed that everything remained in the same life, and now they were almost strangers. Night fell on the house, but Kate did not return. Most likely, she will come in the morning and then tell her new version of events about how Kelly was crying and needed support. The thought of listening to yet another lie made Jason feel bitter inside. But after days of unspoken pain, he learned to hold back. The time for the truth had not yet come. He planned to wait for clear evidence, or at least the opportunity to openly and calmly ask his wife all the questions. The main thing is not to allow yourself to descend into powerless swearing or release of emotions, which will only aggravate the situation later, although every day it became more and more difficult. So another evening passed, moving them one step further from each other and making Kate's deception more obvious to Jason. Looking at the doorway, he saw emptiness in front of him. And somewhere behind the walls of the house, in the light of the street lamps, the secret continued to breathe, consuming his marriage slowly and inexorably. Jason was so excited by everything that was happening that at some point he realized that he just needed to be alone for at least half an hour. After meeting with Kelly, a hollow void arose in my head, filled with painful guesses and endless questions. He felt that just a little more and his nerves would finally give out. Therefore, upon returning home, he headed to the workshop, a place where he usually found peace of mind, working with his hands and being distracted from everything unnecessary. The basement was dim and smelled of old wood and machine oil. Jason mechanically reached for the switch. A soft light came on above the workbench. Here, among the workbenches and shelves with tools, he always felt calmer. Once upon a time, Kate laughed that this corner was his den, where no one could disturb the peace. But now, walking on the concrete floor, he was no longer sure that this place remained untouched. The first thing he did was put away a couple of boxes that had been left behind in the morning after the delivery of materials, transferred the drills to the rest of the tools, and mechanically ran his hand along the flat surface of the workbench. His fingers came across something sticky and smooth, a strip of dried glue. Jason wiped off the glue with a rag and moved the metal box to the side, and suddenly I felt something hard and strange under my boot. I stepped on a small cylinder, which crunched under the weight of my foot. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, bending over. At first, I thought it was a piece of wire or a nail. But when he picked up the find, he was taken aback. It was a half-flattened cigarette butt. In the weak light of the lamp, he could see stains of dried saliva and crumpled paper on the filter. And that's not all. A little to the right, near the wooden boxes, a second similar cigarette butt was found, and the third was lying right against the wall under a hook for gardening tools. There were several of them, as if someone had been sitting or standing here for a while and smoking one after another. "It can't be," Jason whispered, peering into this mixture of ash and tobacco. Neither he nor Kate ever smoked. He considered this habit harmful and always avoided even the smell of cigarettes. The wife, in turn, could not stand the smoke. Her eyes would even water at the slightest contact with tobacco. So where does this come from? He looked around the room warily. I didn't notice any signs of a break-in or someone else's entry. The door is locked from the inside, the windows are small and have bars on them. However, Kate definitely has the key because from time to time she came into the workshop if she needed to find or carry something. And Tommy, their neighbor, had borrowed tools here a couple of times before. However, Tommy did not mention that he came in on his own and even smoked, especially without permission. Too weird. Jason's throat tightened. Finding cigarette butts is almost like finding someone else's underwear, only now it happened in his personal space, where, in theory, no one except him or his wife should enter. And it certainly shouldn't leave traces of tobacco waste. Maybe someone came here on the sly. An alarming thought flashed through. What if Kate was also here? With someone? He shook his head, trying to drive away the terrible guesses. But the memories of the deception with the friend and the found panties hit my consciousness, as if knocking on a closed door that was no longer unnoticed. Is it really all connected? Pounding in my temples. He didn't want to believe that people, at least one of whom was clearly smoking, could be secluded in his own basement. Jason clenched one of the cigarette butts in his fist and felt a pang of disgust. He stood up decisively, took a garbage bag, and collected all the traces. Cigarette butts, ashes, small scraps of paper. I noticed a circle from a beer can on the floor, blackened with stains. Apparently, someone else was drinking here. How long has this been lying around? A week. 2. He thought painfully, examining every square meter. After all, he himself is neat and would not leave trash on the floor. Suddenly, he stumbled with his eyes on a small piece of fabric on the workbench. His heart sank. He was afraid that it was again something like women's underwear. But as he came closer, he discovered that it was just an old rag with which he was wiping off the oil. The breathing subsided, but the anxious trembling did not subside. Panties there, cigarette butts here. How many more surprises will I discover? He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to collect himself. I thought, maybe we should call the police, but even this thought sounded absurd. What would he do? Hello, I found cigarette butts in my basement, and I suspect that my wife is hiding someone. No, this is not a solution. Everything is too vague, complete speculation. He remembered the key once again. Besides him and Kate, only Tommy could open the lock freely if he had once made a duplicate. But why should he take such a risk and come secretly? Jason sighed and carefully hid the bag of garbage in a drawer, intending to take it out later so that Kate wouldn't accidentally stumble upon it and start asking questions after all. He wanted to find out for himself what was what first. At least figure it out a little before lashing out with accusations. He already understood that an unpleasant conversation was being prepared, but in some part of his mind there was a glimmer of hope. What if it turns out that there is an innocent explanation? However, life in recent weeks showed the opposite. He no longer found anything innocent in these oddities. Turning off the lights, he climbed the creaky steps into the house, feeling like an anxious detective carrying evidence against his own loved ones. Or maybe against a person he doesn't know yet. This understanding weighed on him more than all the jealousy and resentment at once. After all, if there is a third party who leaves the smell of cigarettes and beer in the workshop, then the truth may turn out to be even more painful than he expected. The living room was in darkness. Jason sank down onto the couch, hands on his knees, slumped over with exhaustion. Cigarette butts in the workshop. In his own native den, a heavy exhalation escaped from his chest, somewhere between a bitter laugh and an attempt not to spill his anger. Now I definitely have to talk to Kate, he thought. I can't bear to live in this fog. The only question was whether he would be able to remain calm and hear her answer, no matter how terrible it was. But where is she herself? At a friend's place again? Or working late? Judging by the empty house, yes. He looked at his watch. It was past midnight. Tomorrow will again be another day of double life, apparently for both him and her. And him? He lives in a house full of alien smells, alien traces, and alien secrets. Jason removed the hot palm from his face and firmly decided that as soon as Kate crossed the threshold, he would not let her into the bedroom until the conversation. There is a limit to everything, and the discovery of cigarette butts is another signal that she is clearly playing with his trust. Let him explain, at least somehow. Or he will admit it. But he could no longer leave this unanswered. So he sat in the dark, barely restraining his emotions, and listened to the noise of the night wind outside the window, tearing leaves from the tree near the fence. With every rustle, he imagined the sound of footsteps on the porch, but the door remained closed, and he felt that this silence at home was becoming louder, more deafening every minute, as if the night itself was shouting that the secret would soon be revealed, and it would not seem a little to anyone. The night turned out to be warm, but stuffy. Jason tossed and turned in bed for a long time, looking at the ceiling. The clock showed almost midnight, and Kate never returned. He decided to go outside to breathe. Sometimes the coolness of the night air was calming, helping to put his thoughts in order. Taking off his slippers, he quietly went downstairs in only his socks and, opening the back door, went out onto the porch. A light breeze touched the face, the smell of mown grass and dry leaves. Not a single lantern in the neighborhood was lit, only the faint light of the moon slid across the boards of the porch. Jason stood at the railing, resting his palms on them, and listened to himself. His heart was beating steadily, but anxiety and expectation were accumulating in the depths. It's already night, and she's gone, he said mentally. Once again, I have to guess where she is and with whom. Suddenly, he heard a quiet rustling behind the plot, behind a fence with peeling paint. At first, I thought it was a cat or a raccoon, but the sound was repeated, and it seemed as if someone was trying to walk as quietly as possible. Curiosity overcame fear. Jason slowly walked off the porch and headed towards the fence, step by step, trying not to crack the boards. The fence was lopsided in places and was not very high. Between the cracks, the silhouettes of neighboring areas could be seen here and there. Approaching one of the cracks, Jason carefully looked in, and it was as if the ground had been knocked out from under him. In the faint moonlight, he clearly saw Kate standing next to the man, closing her eyes and clinging to him. Looking closer, Jason recognized the profile of Tommy, the neighbor he had once considered his best friend. Neither Kate nor Tommy said a word, as if they were afraid of being overheard. They touched each other carefully, like teenagers hiding from prying eyes behind the school gym. Their light kisses alternated with more explicit ones, and then Tommy pulled Kate closer to him, sliding his hand along her waist. Jason watched as she pulled away, looked at him, and pressed closer again, as if she couldn't tear herself away. For a moment, everything inside him went cold. The picture was too obvious. Not a business meeting, not a cover girlfriend, but a real hug with a neighbor. Jason's world seemed to be collapsing right before his eyes. He grabbed the fence board with his fingers, feeling a bitter wave of either rage or pain rising inside. And yet he did not make a sound, did not rush towards them, did not shout or start a showdown. The realization was too deafening that this was not a ridiculous misunderstanding, but real betrayal. Through the veil of emotions, he noticed how Tommy quietly whispered something in Kate's ear, and she smiled, nodded, and pulled him towards the barn, which stood a little further on the neighbor's property. They slipped silently around the corner, out of sight, and Jason was left alone in the dark area, pressing his shoulder against the fence. Everything inside was so compressed that it seemed like there was not enough air. It would have been logical to rush after them, to cause a scene, but Jason couldn't move. My heart was pounding in my chest like a hammer, and my throat was dry. Is this the end? Or did I see something that is not what it really is? Pathetic attempts to justify what he saw crumbled into dust. He understood. There could be no doubt. Even from a distance, it was clear with what tenderness they touched each other. He froze for a few more seconds, waiting to see if they would come back and notice him. But the silence behind the fence only weighed on my soul, covering me with despair. The body seemed heavy and flabby, and suddenly it seemed to him that he heard a quiet chuckle from there, from someone else's yard. No matter how hard he tried to maintain composure, the pain in his chest intensified, bursting out as if with every new thought about what they were doing there. However, he did not want to meet them face to face now. He understood that any words would sound like an explosion, and it was not a fact that he would have enough self-control not to do something stupid. Would Kate have gone to him if she had seen him? I'm sure not. Judging by her behavior, she did not plan to face her husband, who accused her of cheating. Slowly, with unsteady steps, Jason stepped away from the fence and walked back along the path to the house. As he walked up onto the porch, his gaze glanced at the familiar outline of the patio where he and Tommy had once peacefully drank beer. What if this whole friendship was a cover, he thought bitterly. But instead of plunging into yet another agonizing guess, Jason pulled the door handle and went inside, trying not to look at the dark street. Closing the door, he leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Strange, but there were no tears or hysteria. It was as if there was an icy emptiness inside him. It seemed that some time ago he would have hesitated, relying on chance, but now all the evidence and guesses have formed a complete picture. He finally received the very confirmation that he had feared and was looking for. There were no lights on in the kitchen, only a dim street lamp illuminated the window. Jason walked there, looking at the refrigerator, where notes from Kate still hung short, cold reminders lately. How ironic. Among them she wrote that she would be with a friend, asked not to wait. And here it is, the result of her nightly absences. The thought that he could now get out of the fence, grab Tom by the collar, and demand an explanation did not leave his head. But what would that do? A scandal throughout the entire district, a fight attracting the attention of neighbors, and most importantly, an answer to the main question. Why? He might not have received it. And was he ready to hear the truth here and now, under these merciless moon rays? No, he said to himself, that's not possible. You need to pull yourself together. For the first time in weeks, Jason felt not only pain and anger inside, but also a strange clarity. Now he knows exactly what's going on. There is no need to torment yourself with doubts and look for secondary signs. Rumors, panties, lies with a girlfriend, cigarette butts in the workshop, everything pointed to one thing, and he saw with his own eyes that Kate and Tommy were close. Whirling in his thoughts, he walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa, staring at the wall where photographs of them hung. A photo from the wedding happy faces, he and Kate in an embrace, next to Tommy among the guests, smiling with all his teeth. Nasty irony. Jason suddenly frowned as he looked at that old photograph. Tommy was standing right next to Kate in the third row, but for some reason he had his hand on her shoulder. At the time, it seemed like a simple, friendly gesture to everyone. Silent fatigue fell with incredible force. He didn't want to think anymore, but he understood that he would no longer be able to live as before, turning a blind eye to the obvious. It turned out that he was on the verge of a decisive step, and how exactly this conversation with Kate would go, he did not yet know. Perhaps in rage, perhaps in cold blood, or perhaps something between them will ignite from bitter resentment, and everything will explode in one flash. But one thing is clear. It is useless to hide the truth from yourself. The clock on the wall struck 1 in the morning. The hands counted down the moments, each of which seemed like agony. Will she ever come home? Flashed through his head. However, Jason spent the rest of the night on the couch without turning on the light, as if unable to look at reality in full light. Maybe he still hoped that in the dark the pain would be a little softer. So he sat in silence, in the heart of which lived the bitter fact his wife chose someone else. And along with the realization of this fact came a burning sensation, as if a part of himself remained there, behind the fence, at the moment when Kate and Tommy disappeared behind the barn under the muted moonlight. Jason woke up that same day when he saw his wife and Tom behind the fence, with a new feeling inside, something like cold determination. Usually pain, jealousy, or resentment overwhelmed him, and he could neither sleep nor eat, constantly replaying frames of the night scene in his head. But by morning a completely different feeling came. He realized that he did not want a loud scandal or hasty accusations. Instead, a plan was born within him. Maintain external calm and let Kate think for herself that everything is going as before. Let her make sure that he doesn't suspect anything. He did not make this decision in order to give up revenge or remain deceived forever. Rather, he needed time to understand how to act correctly. The burning pain made him a little numb, and now this numbness turned into a cold calculation. He looked at himself in the mirror and said mentally, "Can you be that convincing?" and answered himself, "We'll have to." Kate called him at work with an unexpected offer. "Jay, hi. I thought maybe we could have dinner together today. I'll finish early and go get some groceries." "Certainly," he responded with perhaps a calmer tone than he could have. "What time will you be back?" "Around 7 or 8 o'clock, if I don't get stuck in traffic jams." The wife's voice sounded somehow at ease, even warm, as if in all the last weeks there had been no shadow of a lie between them. How cleverly he pretends to be, Jason thought. Or maybe she really doesn't feel sorry for deceiving me. He stayed a little late at work so as not to sit at home alone and not worry about all sorts of nonsense. When he returned, he found Kate already in the kitchen. She was chopping vegetables for a salad, and tomato sauce was hissing and gurgling on the stove. Hearing footsteps, Kate turned and smiled. "Hello. I decided to make pasta with chicken. Hope you like it." "Good choice," Jason answered, trying to look reassuring. He approached and lightly touched her shoulder. "Need help?" "Well, maybe just grate the cheese." Kate pointed to a piece of cheese on the cutting board. For a moment, her gaze met Jason's, and he caught some confusion in her eyes. Maybe she remembered how she had just recently been in the arms of another man? Or, on the contrary, was she checking to see if her husband saw some kind of catch? But after a second, she still looked away and returned to cutting. Jason began to grate the cheese, carefully holding it so that it wouldn't crumble past the grater. Familiar household chores created the appearance of family comfort. But inside him sat a cold observer. She looks calm now. He probably thinks everything is under control. The rest of the evening passed in an even harmonious rhythm. Kate persistently talked about her work, about the project she was working on, and complained about certain colleagues who do everything at the last minute. Jason nodded, sometimes asking leading questions, feigning interest. When they started dinner, he felt how ironic the situation was. Here they were eating together, laughing at old jokes, exactly just like in their previous happy life. Only now he knew about her nightly walks, and she was probably afraid that he would someday guess. At the end of dinner, Jason said, "Shall we have dessert?" "Oh, I didn't think about that at all," Kate admitted. "Maybe some cookies and tea." "Great idea." He took her favorite mug out of the closet and poured some tea. The strangest thing is that from the outside, everything looked almost the same as before. Or maybe I myself can pretend to be as good as she is. A thought slipped through my mind. The next day, Jason decided to take his pretense further. He got up early to make Kate breakfast toast with eggs and ham, some fruit salad and coffee. Once upon a time, he had already given her such surprises on weekends, but in recent months their relationship had cooled so much that such gestures had faded away. Kate came down in her robe, clearly surprised. "Wow, breakfast at 5 in the morning. What happened?" She yawned and looked at the table. "I just thought it's been a while since we spoiled each other," Jason replied. "And while it comes to that, why not start in the morning?" "This is cute," she said with a more sincere smile. Kate seemed a little embarrassed. After eating a couple of bites, she praised that everything was delicious. Then, as if testing the waters, she asked, "Jay, is everything really okay?" Certainly, he tried to keep only a slight carelessness in his voice. Why not? She just shrugged and went back to eating. But this question was not asked by chance. Perhaps she felt a change in his behavior. After all, before, on the contrary, he was a little aloof. But now he has suddenly turned into a caring husband, as if he still wants to improve his life. All day he tried to maintain the image of ideal. He stopped at the store, bought products that Kate likes, and brought fresh flowers in a vase. She seemed to relax, taking it as a manifestation of passion that had flared up again. Kate spent 2 evenings in a row at home with him, and although she did not mention her delays, he noticed how her phone often rang. Messages were arriving. She watched, read, and put her mobile phone in her bag with affected carelessness. Surely Tommy, he thought, but didn't ask. How evil volume continued to visit them just like that. It has become a habit for him in recent years to come in the evening with a couple of beers and chat with his neighbor about work, football, and other everyday trifles. Jason used to accept him as a good friend, but now, knowing exactly what was happening, it took him great effort to maintain an even tone. A few days after the night Jason saw them, Tom stopped by around 7 in the evening. Kate was supposedly in training, although Jason no longer believed a single word and returned a little later. Jason opened the door to his neighbor, trying to smile. "Hello, Tom. Come in, let's have a drink." "Hello, buddy." He smiled as if nothing had happened, holding a bag with 2 cans in his hands. "We haven't sat together for a long time, damn it. We're on our own all the time." He walked into the living room and sat down in an armchair. Jason noticed that his hands were shaking a little. Perhaps Tom was nervous, or did he just imagine it? However, the neighbor's face expressed almost routine carelessness. "How are things at work?" Jason asked, accepting the can of beer and taking a sip. "Nothing special," Tom shrugged. "Routine, as always." "How are you?" "Yes, too. There are not very many new orders, but enough," Jason replied, feeling a bitterness rise in his throat. The conversation flowed calmly. They discussed the weather, football, and a couple of news items in the local newspaper. But the feeling of falsehood was literally in the air. Jason could see so clearly how Tom was trying not to meet his gaze. Who knows, maybe he secretly suspected that Kate's husband knew about their relationship. Although, judging by his behavior, he could simply believe that the deception goes unnoticed. When Kate returned, shouting from the threshold, "I'm home," Tom perked up, looked at his watch, and suddenly said, "Oh, it's been so long, I have to go. Sorry, Jay, I'm a bit late." "Well, thanks for the company." Jason responded, rising from his chair. They both walked towards the exit and crossed paths with Kate for half a second in the corridor. She said a short, "Hello, Tom," and, almost without stopping, walked on. Tom seemed embarrassed, muttered, "Hello," and hurried away. Jason watched this moment with cold curiosity. It was obvious that this couple did not want to communicate publicly again. It was too risky. A day later, the situation repeated itself in a new way. Jason, as planned, continued to play the role of an ideal husband. He cooked, asked Kate about her affairs, even suggested watching a movie together, although without much desire. He noticed how she gradually relaxed. She probably thought that her secret hobby was going unnoticed, and her husband simply decided to take care of the family for fear of losing her. Sometimes at night, Kate would still disappear, coming up with something like "urgent work," or "we need to help Sarah," or "they called to the office at night to urgently close a report." Whatever it was, she didn't even try to be too original. And Jason nodded, "Of course, honey," and saw her leave. Apparently, to a neighbor. He endured, tormented all night long, remembering the scene behind the fence, but still adhered to the idea of not showing his cards. A mixture of despair and strange coldness was brewing in my soul. Time after time he tried to understand. Will the plan completely destroy me? After all, every visit Kate made to that other one tormented him. But for now, reason prevailed. One evening, when Kate returned closer to midnight, he met her on the porch with a warm blanket in his hands. It got cold, I thought. I'll take a blanket and sit here, wait for you. Oh, Jay, confusion flashed in her eyes. Were you waiting for me on the street? No, I just decided to get some fresh air, he chuckled, as if everything was innocent. I knew you were having a difficult day today. I thought it would be nicer if I met you. Her gaze continually slid over his face, as if trying to understand whether there was a truth hidden in him that would destroy this apparent calm. But she didn't say anything, just thanked him briefly and went inside. On the fourth day of playing perfect, Jason bought roses and put them in a vase in the bedroom. When Kate entered there in the evening, she broke into a surprised smile. Are you? Roses? In the bedroom? This hasn't happened in a while. I thought that I wanted it to be nice and beautiful here, he answered. It seemed to him that a spark of regret flashed in his wife's eyes. Maybe she really felt guilty for her betrayal, or, on the contrary, I thought, how can I destroy all this if he is so attentive? But he didn't ask again. The questions no longer made sense. He knew she was lying, and she probably knew that he was partly guessing something. And yet, in the moment they continued to play roles. She a naive, contented wife, he a carefree, loving husband. In the wake of this imaginary happiness, Kate suggested, maybe we can go somewhere this weekend, just the two of us. What about work? He clarified. Well, you can take a short vacation, even for a couple of days. An outing to a neighboring city, for example, to the mountains. Jason smiled. Why not? In fact, he understood that Kate, perhaps to ease her own conscience or to make the relationship seem whole, had decided to improve the marriage while she was secretly dating Tommy. The irony was almost unbearable, but he did not refuse. Let him think that everything was going wonderfully according to her plan. Soon another telling moment happened. That evening, as Jason was cutting salad, Kate's phone, which was lying on the kitchen table, rang. She was upstairs at the time, taking a shower. Usually, when the phone rang, Kate grabbed it in a second, but here she was not there. Jason saw the name Tom flash up on the screen in a short text. He could have ignored it, it was not his call, but his whole body was frozen with curiosity and anger. The call ended before he could decide what to do. Then a message came. When will you be able to? I'm waiting. Jason, naturally, did not pick up the phone because the game assumed that he did not know anything. But seeing this message was painful. Tom did not hesitate to write to her so directly. He returned to the salad, pretending he hadn't noticed anything. A couple of minutes later, Kate entered the kitchen, wearing sweatpants and a light t-shirt. She was still drying her hair with a towel. Noticing the phone's screen flickering, she quickly grabbed it and slid her finger over the buttons, apparently reading the message. Her expression became tense, her lips pursed for a moment, but then she tried to give herself a carefree look, turning to Jason. Someone from work asks if I can respond by mail. I'll have to leave after dinner for a couple of hours. I hope you don't mind. Of course not, he shrugged indifferently. Everything was seething in his soul, but he maintained an icy calm. Kate leaned over and gave him a quick peck on the cheek, a gesture that had been so natural in the old days, but now seemed like theatrical staging. She took the phone and hurriedly went into the living room, apparently to answer Tom's message. All rehearsals continue, Jason muttered quietly, remaining alone in the kitchen. A couple more days passed in this mode. Jason noticed that Kate seemed to be trying to be more attentive, tell him about work, and willingly accept his care. She apparently calmed her conscience partly by convincing herself that, since everything is so good, then nothing bad is happening. Tom visited them a couple of times, and each time it was painful minutes. Jason freely discussed with his old friend the weather conditions, the workshop, some everyday trifles, and at the same time not a single muscle twitches on his face. On one of these visits, Tom dared to ask, "Listen, Jay, where is Kate? Looks like I'm at work, should be here soon," he responded. Tom nodded, looking at his watch, and was frankly nervous. Obviously, he expected to cross paths with her, and not just with her husband. However, Kate was delayed, and he sat on the edge of the sofa, sipping beer, poorly hiding his anxiety. Jason watched him and understood that everything was boiling inside. He wanted to blurt out the truth, throw a bottle at him. But instead, he continued his polite conversation. In the end, Tom couldn't stand it anymore. "Well, okay, I guess I'll go." "Yes, sure," Jason said pointedly. "I was glad to see you." They shook hands and Tom hurried out. Jason followed him to the door, watching his neighbor walk away along the sidewalk. A silent question sounded in my head. "What are you hoping for, Tom? Why are you acting so provocatively?" But he didn't know the answer, and probably Tom believed that there was no danger as long as Jason smiled and opened the door for him with goodwill. While these days without scandals passed, Jason more than once caught himself thinking that he was living in some kind of unnatural dream. On the one hand, he is full of pain and resentment. On the other hand, he smiles at his wife, brings her coffee in bed, and invites her to the movies for the weekend. He saw how embarrassed she was, but still accepted these gestures, apparently hoping that everything was still under her control. Sometimes she stayed late at night, sometimes spent the evenings with her husband, and even tried to be affectionate. And Jason wondered, can she really exist so easily in two relationships at the same time? In the depths of his soul, he understood. This performance cannot continue indefinitely. Either she will sooner or later suspect that he knows the truth, or he himself will not stand it. The tension grew like a tightrope. Each new line from Kate sounded in his ears like a blow to metal, causing a response vibration in his chest. He increasingly woke up at night in a cold sweat, remembering her kisses with Tom, which he saw behind the fence. But in front of her, he tried to maintain an absolute mask of calm. Sometimes it occurred to him that perhaps Kate was waiting for some moment to talk to him. But looking at her, he understood. She was either hesitant or simply hoping that it will do. After all, as long as no one raises questions head-on, she can enjoy her double life. And Jason stoically played his strange performance of the ideal husband, accumulating bitter determination in his soul. It won't last long, and one day he will demand an explanation but on his own terms, and then they will both have to throw off all their masks. However, for now the theater of lies continued, and Jason was in no hurry to raise the curtain. He persistently accumulated both his own internal strength and external reasons, so as not to remain unarmed when the climax came. And Kate, judging by the way she gradually relaxed, believed that everything was going according to plan. And Tom, continuing to come in the evenings, also did not suspect that their innocent conversations about football were just the threshold of a thunderstorm that would soon fall on all three. That evening, Jason walked around the house in a wide arc so that Kate could not see him through the window, and quietly walked to the back door that led to the basement. The day before he told his wife that he was going out tonight. Kate apparently believed it without question. She only told him not to overwork and to get to his destination carefully. Jason nodded, left the house, but then, instead of going somewhere, came back through the back door and hid in his own workshop, located in the far corner of the basement. This was his shelter. There were workbenches, shelves with tools, and a faint smell of wood, varnish, and oils. Jason sat for a long time in the twilight, looking at the dimly lit walls. The thought flashed that he felt like an uninvited guest in his own home. But exactly, he was deceived. He endured lies all this time. Now that there was confidence that Kate could invite Tom to their home, especially knowing that her husband is on shift, Jason wanted to see live, or at least hear confirmation of his most terrible guesses. Did you want to or not? Rather, he could not do otherwise. The truth still seeped into his life. All that remained was to meet her without illusions. To avoid detection, Jason left the lights in the workshop off. However, he still turned on the small table lamp, covering its dim lampshade with a rag so that the bright beam from outside would not hit his eyes. It became a little gloomy, but he could see the tools and documents. Each rustling sound was a tense vibration in the chest. The clock showed just after 9 when he heard the front door slam overhead. It became clear that Kate was at home. He caught the muffled sounds of footsteps. Short phrases escaped through the air. Kate was probably talking on the phone. Then everything became quiet. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened. Jason thought, Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she won't dare to call him. But then there was a bell or a knock on the door in the house. Kate walked quickly down the corridor, and soon he heard voices. The meaning of individual words was difficult to make out through the thickness of the floor, but the second voice belonged unmistakably to Tom. Jason's insides suddenly tightened. He put his hand to his mouth and closed his eyes, as if trying to calm the pain. There was muffled laughter from above, and the sound of footsteps along the corridor, as if they had walked into the living room together. The thought flashed, what if they just sit, drink beer, watch TV? But he knew that this was self-deception. For regular meetings, they do not need an empty night without a husband. All his feelings literally screamed that something was about to happen for which he was psychologically trying to prepare, but was still not ready. A little more time passed. Judging by the rare phrases that he caught, Kate and Tom were talking about some little things, joking. Then the television sounded a little louder. Kate must have turned on something for the background. And then, a change came. Jason heard quieter, more intermittent words that sounded like whispers or quiet laughter. The knocking on the floor became irregular, as if someone was moving slowly, either changing position or moving around the room. He understood that everything was happening literally a few meters above his head, and this caused excruciating tension. I wanted to jump up, scream, tear the lie to shreds. But instead, Jason seemed rooted to the chair like a stretched string. There was a lump in my throat, and my heart was beating feverishly. He understood, this is the final line. At first, he clearly heard the sound of subtle moans and deep sighs. After click, as if something had fallen from the table onto the floor. Soon it was heard slip fabrics on the sofa and heavy breathing. No, it was no longer possible to deceive ourselves about what was happening. With each new sound, a spasm grew in Jason's chest. My heart seemed to be beating so loudly that all Kate, Tom, and even the neighbors could hear it. He ran a hand through his hair and instinctively grabbed the edge of the workbench, trying to keep his body from running out into the light. The brain was feverishly looking for at least some clue, explanation, reassurance, but there were no explanations. There was only the harsh reality. His wife, his best friend upstairs, was engaged thereby, which finally destroyed their marriage. From somewhere above, there was a rustling sound, sharper movements, and then Kate, he recognized her voice barely audibly moaned something, clearly hinting at pleasure. He had never heard her like this. Even in their best times, she rarely allowed herself to react so loudly, and this made it even more painful. Nausea rose in my throat. She never moaned like that in front of me, flashed through his head, and the pain burned inside him even more intensely. He suddenly felt a surge of anger mixed with despair. His fingers clenched on the workbench until his knuckles turned white. Every new moment seemed like torture. Jason could hear them moving, maybe from the couch to the carpet, the rhythms changing, something creaking faintly. Tom's whispers were intertwined with Kate's soft moans, and although it was impossible to make out the words, the tone spoke for itself. It was such an intimate scene that Jason's temples were buzzing. For a moment, he wanted all the sounds to stop, for something to abruptly distract them. But nothing happened. They continued at their own pace at his house, in his living room. There was deathly silence in which their every breath was like thunder. Jason had a strong desire to grab any piece of metal and knock over the tools with a crash in order to bring them to light, to make them understand, I'm here, you are not alone. But he remembered the decision not to create a scandal. He didn't know why he needed this painful precision to hear to the end and not interfere. Perhaps, deep down, he wanted to catch Kate in a lie that she could no longer deny. And if he intervenes right now, everything will turn into a pogrom and an instant scandal, after which it will be difficult to get at least some explanation. There will be only rage. So he sat and listened to how his old life was being destroyed. How many minutes, 5, 10, or half an hour, he could not determine. Time had lost its meaning. Each sound echoed with a wave of pain, but at the same time gave rise to a strange determination in him. Now there will definitely be no illusions left. Suddenly, everything went quiet upstairs. Jason sat for a couple more moments, not breathing, and realized that it seemed that only the TV was sounding. Perhaps Kate and Tom are now cuddling, catching their breath, or maybe they went to the kitchen to get water. His mind did not want to develop these pictures further. Over a period of time, he heard light laughter and the rustling of clothes. So they put themselves in order. Jason's heart was beating like crazy. He could no longer distinguish what he felt more strongly: anger, resentment, disgust, or the desire for retribution. But the mind was reminded again. Control yourself. A little more time passed. He heard the springs of the sofa creaking in the living room. Probably someone had gotten up. Looks like Tom is starting to get ready. Again, a short dialogue, then the sound of steps towards the exit and a quiet click of the door. That's it. Tom left. Kate was most likely left alone in the house. Jason quietly rose from his chair and straightened up. His neck ached, and there was a bitter taste in his mouth. He understood that now was not the time to go upstairs and start a showdown. Kate doesn't know yet that he was home. Maybe she thinks everything went perfectly. The thought that this happened literally over his head caused a feeling of disgust. But at the same time, he felt cold determination. Now there is no doubt. Everything I've heard leaves me with no right to trust or hesitate. He turned off the lamp, threw his jacket over his shoulders, and sat quietly in the corner of the workshop to hear if Kate would go down to the basement. No, there was complete silence upstairs. Maybe she took a shower and went to bed happy, contented, as if her husband was at work and her lover came to relieve her boredom. Well then, Jason thought, now I know everything for sure, and I will never be able to return to the old, pretending not to notice. He decided that he would still spend the rest of the night here, not wanting to see his wife in this state, neither her absent-minded gaze nor possible hypocritical smiles. My first impulse was to run to my car and spend the night in a motel away from this house. But stopping at the door, he realized that Kate would hear the sound of the engine and notice its departure or entry. This means that he will guess that he was somewhere nearby. He didn't want to give himself away just yet. So he stayed. He sat down again at his workbench, staring into the space, barely illuminated by the moonlight that penetrated from the window under the basement ceiling. The thought was pounding in my temples. They had sex on the same couch where Kate and I once watched movies, ate popcorn, and fooled around. Nausea rose in his throat, and he swallowed hard. He had to decide, what's next? Pack your things and file for divorce. Tearing off all the masks in one furious scene. Should he live in the same house even for a day? There were too many questions, and in all of them there was a painful flickering image of Kate and Tom in an embrace that he now could not get rid of. And so the night passed in the dark, among tools and the old smell of varnish, under the weight of the harsh truth, which is louder than any screams. For Jason, this was the night when illusions died completely, and in this silence, his pain screamed so loudly that he seemed to hear nothing but the frantic beating of his own heart. The morning after the night when Jason was forced to witness betrayal in his own home, he woke up in the same place, in a darkened basement. Having taken a short nap right at the workbench, he felt exhausted. There was fatigue in his body and a dull emptiness in his soul. It seemed that everything inside was petrified, and the pulse was beating somewhere in the distant background. He got out into the house while Kate was still sleeping, as he had assumed. Glancing briefly into the living room, he saw the sofa on which his wife had been with Tom the previous evening. There was still a slight smell of cheap scented candles in the air, perhaps lit for romance. The thought seemed to burn Jason. He still realized that he could not stay here a day longer. Not for a minute. Tiptoeing past the living room, Jason went up to the bedroom. Looking around, he felt that many things, once so dear, now had no meaning to him. Photos, jewelry, a shared wardrobe, all this has become part of a past life. He wanted to take only the essentials that he couldn't live without, and those few personal items that really meant something. He found a travel bag and stuffed several shirts, pants, and underwear into it. I touched the photograph from their wedding that was lying on the nightstand with my hand and realized that it was no longer unbearable to look at it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Kate move slightly under the blanket. My heart sank at the sight of my wife, who until recently had seemed like my dearest person, but the thought of what she did at night crossed out any illusions. Jason quietly put the photo back down, as if it now belonged to another world. Zipping his bag, he sighed and walked into the kitchen. There was some kind of sticky note lying next to the refrigerator. Jason wrote just one phrase on it. "You forgot your panties not only in the grass." I didn't want to add anything more. There was no need to mention that he knew all the details of her betrayal. She herself will understand. Perhaps he will be horrified and realize that he saw or heard much more. But that didn't matter anymore. He attached the piece of paper to the refrigerator door with a heart-shaped magnet, a sarcastic detail who once seemed cute, and he headed into the hallway, clutching his bag in his hands. My heart was pounding, but it was easy to move, as if in this departure freedom from unbearable lies was finally born. Closing the door behind him, Jason felt the morning air hit his face. The street was just waking up. From the neighboring houses, the sounds of coffee machines and voices were heard, and somewhere in the distance, the noise of a passing car. No one knew yet that he was leaving for good. Perhaps the neighbors would notice and see him with a bag, but that hardly bothered Jason right now. When he walked past the fence behind which he had once seen Kate and Tom, his throat constricted again, as if from a piercing prick of memory. But Jason continued walking without looking back. He understood that life in this house was over. Let Kate remain there and the ghost of her own lies. Already on the approaches to the bus station, he dialed the number Mary, Tom's wife. A cruel, but as he believed, a fair measure. Mary, an intelligent and straightforward woman, did not deserve her husband to do this to her. Yes, it seemed like an act of revenge, but Jason could not find the strength to remain silent when, a couple of houses away from him, another woman was living in deception. The phone rang several times before Mary picked up. "Yes, Jason. Did something happen?" There was surprise in the voice. He rarely called her directly. "Mary, I need to tell you something." He began in a breaking voice. And he told me, briefly and to the point, about how Kate and Tom repeatedly met behind his back, about the fact that he himself is leaving and is not going to live in this city anymore. After a moment's pause, when Mary seemed frozen at the phone, he heard her curse quietly and then ask in an intermittent whisper, "Are you sure, Jason? Can't be. I saw and heard it myself. Sorry, but I couldn't help but tell you." Mary seemed stunned for a couple of seconds, then thanked her in a dull, broken voice. "The connection has been lost." Jason dropped his phone into his jacket pocket in frustration. Maybe it was cruel, but he thought it was fair, and then let them figure it out for themselves. Soon the bus, driving off to the side Escondido, started the engine. Jason climbed onto the step, paid for his ticket, and sat by the window, clutching his bag in his lap. The bus jerked and moved away, leaving behind the streets that were supposed to become a cozy family nest for it. But now they have turned into disaster. He drove away without looking out the window. The sun's rays reflected on the glass, and my head felt empty. The anger fizzled out along with this short but decisive meeting of the morning. All that was left was resentment, fatigue, and a faint premonition. Something in life will change for the better as soon as I get off this bus. Arriving in another city, he almost randomly chose it on the map, where there were several new workshops and enterprises. Jason first got a job in a small auto repair shop. The owner, looking at his experience and recommendations, agreed to take him on for a trial period. "We are currently expanding our staff," he said. Jason didn't talk about his personal drama, just nodded and thanked him for the chance. The first days in the new place were like a fog. He screwed in nuts, repaired engines, carried heavy tools, all mechanically, without much emotion. In the evenings, I rented a modest room in a motel on the outskirts, where the old bed creaked and the wallpaper was peeling off from the ceiling. But even this wretched environment was not as depressing as the memories of the house in which the trace of his broken heart remained. Meanwhile, in the small town where he left, the neighbors' whispers spread quickly. For several days, Kate pretended that nothing was happening. She found Jason's note, felt cold from it, but in the first minutes, perhaps, she calmed herself. Maybe it's a rash decision and he'll come back. However, when the days passed and Jason did not show up or get in touch, it became clear that he left seriously. Things got especially worse when Mary, Tom's wife, began asking people, and literally a week later, she announced to her husband that she knew everything. They said that she flew out of the house with a suitcase, slamming the door in anger, and even wanted to throw Tom out the door. Soon everyone around began to whisper, "Did Kate steal Mary's husband? What kind of relationship did they have?" And at the same time, there was condemnation addressed to both. Tom is a traitor. Kate is a liar. There were rumors that Mary called Kate and made a scandal at her, calling her a homewrecker and promising that life for this couple in the city would become unbearable. At the same time, neighbors increasingly noticed that Kate and Tom did not openly demonstrate their relationship. They walked away from each other, trying not to appear together in public. For a small town where everyone knows each other, this seemed a pitiful sight. Kate practically stopped going out in those days. One evening, Mary made a scene for her right outside the store. A tense conversation, anxious looks from passers-by, and Kate then turned away and walked away with quick steps. People retold this incident, adding color. Does she even regret what she did? Kate did not make excuses and gradually plunged into loneliness and undisguised melancholy. They said that from time to time Kate sits on the porch, watches the neighbors come in and out, and when they see her, they begin to whisper. There was no talk of any friendly communication. Tom, they whispered, sometimes visited her in the evenings, but not through the front door, but from the side of the yard, as if trying not to attract attention. Perhaps their relationship could not blossom due to disappointment and universal condemnation. Jason, he gradually settled down in the new city. I rented a tiny apartment above a grocery store, where from the window I could only see the flow of cars on the highway. But he had enough. He worked from early morning until late evening, returned home, and made himself some simple tea. Was it easier for him? Not really. The pain remained, but became a little less acute every week. No one knew his story, no one whispered behind his back, and although loneliness was oppressive, he felt calmer than in the circle of city rumors. Sometimes, sitting on a chair by the curtained window, he thought, remembered the night he spent in the basement and the sound of voices upstairs. At such moments he felt disgusted and empty, but he knew that he had made a choice: leave and start all over again, without lies and manipulation. Staying in the same house would only torment himself further. Weeks passed, and one weekend Jason received a random message from a mutual friend who was aware of the events. "Hey, hang in there. Everything is in flux here. Mary broke up her marriage with Tom, and Kate practically doesn't leave the house." Jason just sighed after reading this. He was not happy that someone's destinies also collapsed, but deep down he saw this as retribution for deception. And in the end, he knew he is not responsible for them. Thus, the story ended for their small town with a series of scandals and gossip, and for Jason himself with a short note thrown on the refrigerator, which symbolized the point of no return. Nothing any longer connected him with the house where he had been deceived in the most cruel way. Now his path lay where he could reassemble his life piece by piece. They say that Kate then left the town for a week to visit some relatives, trying to quell the scandal. But when I returned, everything became the same sidelong glances and ridicule. Tom tried to maintain ostentatious confidence, but Mary filed for divorce, and no one spoke of Kate as Harper's wife. Her name became associated only with other people's pain and rumors. And Jason, when another working day ended, walked along a new street and felt that he himself had become a different person. He lost love, trust, and home, but gained an understanding that sometimes escape is the only way to save himself from ultimate self-destruction. The smell of fresh air at sunset, routine conversations in a car repair shop, simple food in an empty apartment, all this was now his reality. The loud echo of silence left after leaving will resonate for a long time in the hearts of those involved in this story. But his own pain turned into peace, and every day Jason learned to live without looking back at the life where someone else's betrayal poisoned his love. He hoped that one day he would find new happiness without panties lost in the grass, without lies, and without bitter secret conversations behind the fence. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.